Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Deploying to Spring Boot Apps with Kubernetes and GitHub Actions and Feature Flags. If that's not a long enough title, I have a shorter title for myself. My name is Brian Benz. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft. And
I'm Stephanie Crater. I'm a software engineer on the Java engineering team here at Microsoft.
And this is going to be a great session. I mean, it's all 100% demos, basically. This is the only slide you're going to see. Actually, it's not true. We have one slide at the end, which gives you a link to some swag that you can get for free if you give us your name and email. No salesman will call, but you can get some t-shirts and some other cool stuff. So hang on for that and check out the demo. So Stephanie, you want to get us started?
Yeah, so let's take a look first, just the app that we're going to be building. So it lives on Brian's GitHub, if you guys are interested. And we're going to be showing you about these feature flags. So Brian can go and turn on and off some of these feature flags.
Yeah.
Let's take a look.
I'm going to turn on the beta. So what's going to happen is without doing a redeployment, our Kubernetes instance actually has a new feature. Yay, which is Bit.
There he is, the developer advocate. Great. And even though this maybe looks complicated, it's actually super easy to build using Maven. But it's a little bit more complex than just a simple Hello World demo, because we do have these feature flags and we do have sensitive data to deal with. There's an app configuration connection string. And it's good to know how to deal with this, right? Because in the real world, we do have data to protect. It's not just a little Hello World. So to build it locally, you just clone the repo. You can set the connection string as an environment variable and then build using Maven. So there, Maven clean install, and the app will become available on localhost. But obviously, we don't just want to build this locally. We don't want it to be, well, works on my machine, but maybe not your machine, right? There's dependencies to deal with, all of that. And we want it in a container, right? Because the whole point of this talk is that we're going to ultimately deploy to Kubernetes. So here we have this Docker file that I made. So we're going to build this using Docker. And we're going to use a multi-stage Docker file, right? So the first stage, we're building the application, and the second stage, we're going to copy it into our base image. And we're really only going to copy over what we need from the first stage into the second stage. So we only have the app and everything we need to run it, none of those built dependencies. And this is a pretty simple Docker file, as you can see. Really, the only part that could be difficult is that connection string, because that's sensitive data. So we don't want to hard code that in, right? That's a good first step, just to get everything working. Set it as an environment variable, and then once that works, never do it again, because we do not want to commit that sensitive data to our GitHub repo. That's public, right? Anyone scrolling around GitHub could just come across your connection string, mess with your app. No, thank you. So we're going to pass it as a build arg, which if this were just a single stage Docker file, you would not want to do. But because it's multi-stage, we can do this. Yes, thank you for highlighting that. So yeah, our first stage, right, we're setting up Maven because that's what we're using to build. This Docker file lives in the repo, so just copying everything over and then saying, hey, we have this argument, the connection string, and then we run Maven clean install, defining that environment variable with the connection string. So to run this, you say docker builds -t, name of your image, and then -- build arg connection string, and that's the connection string. And then, great, our app is built. Let's copy it into our base image. We're using distro list because it's super, super small, right? Very lightweight. You could also use Alpine, which has my heart a little bit because I've done a lot of our Java on Alpine here at Microsoft, but distro list is smaller, so we'll use that. And just copying over from the builder stage, in the target folder, the demo.jar that we built. And because we're not copying over that connection string, it's not going to be available in the image. It's not like baked into that image. So that's secure. That's all good. And then our entry point, it will be available on port 80. So when you run, you'll just do docker run -p 8080. So you're exposing the container's port 80 to the host. And then this will be available on localhost. And to pass it that connection string, Brian will show you how to do that securely in Kubernetes. And then, yeah, how are we going to store and manage this container on ACR?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, this is the demo that I like to show because it's not a simple hello world demo that stands out by itself. And then you get into the real world and you have to deploy something that connects to something else. And you don't want to put sensitive information in GitHub, obviously. Even if it's private GitHub, there might be, you don't have control over who has access to that all the time. Especially if it's a public repo, you need to be able to do this. So the way we've set this up is we set that environment variable for the app configuration connection string one time, and that connects to the feature flag. And we use that for everything that we're going to do through this whole process. So Stephanie just talked about how we can create this locally. The next thing I did is I moved into building this in Kubernetes. So the demo that you saw here is actually running on Kubernetes, and specifically AKS on an Azure server, which is our Azure Kubernetes service, which is a managed service that we have. And let's dive into how we actually got that built. All right, so the first thing here, this is basically the commands and things I used. So as Stephanie mentioned, they use the Docker file. Oh, I guess I should mention first, all of this code that we've been referencing is in bbenz DevOps for Java Shops, test feature flags, containers. Everything here, including all the workflows and things I'm going to show you later with GitHub Actions, are here. So you can check that out as well. So from there, we run it locally. Docker build, Docker run, access the file. Because we have the environment variable set on our local machine, it runs. It won't run without that environment variable, which is the connection to the feature flag. So the next thing we want to do is we actually want to create an Azure Container Registry, ACR. To do that, I actually did that in the Azure portal. And let me show you that quick. So the Azure portal, for those of you who might not be familiar with it, is portal.azure.com out on the web. And you can get a free trial if you don't have one already. But basically, this is a resource group. I created this resource group. And inside the resource group, I've got two things, a container registry and a Kubernetes service. And I created these through the portal by just saying create, hitting this little plus sign. Boy. And it takes a minute. This is why I don't want to do the live demo today. I'm going to show you how these things are created. But the containers, you create a Kubernetes by clicking create, and the container app by clicking create. And not container app, the container registry by clicking create. That's all you have to do. And then once you've done that, for the Azure Container Registry, you just keep everything default and create the registry. Then the next thing you need to do is there is a little step you need to go through. You need to have the Azure CLI installed, and that runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux just fine. You can also use it in what we call a cloud shell on the web. But once you've got that installed, you can do AZ ACR login. And what this does is initializes the registry and gives you some login credentials on your local machine that you can use to work with that registry. And then the next thing we do, because we know this Docker file works, I have this in my local repo, and all I need to do to get it to my Azure Container Registry is use this AZ ACR build command, which is extremely cool. So when you use an AZ ACR build command, it's like using Docker build, just like Stephanie did in the first step. But it also packages up everything that it needs to run this code. It puts it in what's called a hosted agent on Azure, and it actually performs the build on the hosted agent. If the build is successful, it actually posts or pushes the container to the registry. So now you have a container in the registry. So what I say is AZ ACR build, and you tell it which registry we want to send the container image to. And then the image itself, we want to name it test feature flags V1. That's all I had to do. All of a sudden, once I ran that, I know it works locally. Because I had the environment variable local, it actually built and deployed, and it's sitting in my registry now. So if I go into my Azure Container Registry, I can actually see it. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, so slow when you start to type in my repositories. There it is. DevOps. It's called test feature flags, and there's V1. So the V1 is sitting there, it's ready to go, and we can use that for deploying to our Kubernetes. In this case, as I mentioned before, we're going to use Kubernetes service. And to do that, there is a Azure CLI command you could use, but it didn't work for me because I need a different location. Microsoft, our customers come first, so we have second dibs when it comes to resources that we can use in certain locations. And because I set up my resource group in West US 2, I couldn't create the container, the Azure Kubernetes service on West US 2 as well. I had to create it in West US 3. So I went through the portal to do that. And once again, I showed you before how to set up the portal. I go into create containers, Azure Kubernetes service. The only things I needed to change from the default is I enabled HTTP access, which gives you access to an ingress controller and a cluster manager that are owned and managed by the AKS service for you, which is one of the features. So it's an optional add-on, but you just enable it through the portal. You can also enable it through the CLI. And then I wanted to set up integration with my Azure Container Registry that I already created, so I don't have to do any authentication shenanigans when it comes to connecting to AKS and ACR. And it's just going to work when I deploy something. Everything else I just set up as default. So it was really simple in the portal to do that. It just took a few minutes to fire up. And in the interest of time, I won't show you the actual setup or anything, but it's basically everything was default except for connecting to the container registry and setting up HTTP application routing, which was just literally toggling it and saying yes. Now, once I've got the AKS set up, it takes a couple minutes to instantiate. Then I go and set up my kube control using the Azure CLI again, AZ AKS install CLI. That's going to install it on AKS, but it's also going to install it locally, so I can run things locally, and that's important. And then I set a path. So I had to set a path in my Windows machine to make sure that it works in the future and it can find kube control on my local machine. Next thing I want to do is I want to set the Kubernetes context. When you work with Kubernetes, you have to have local credentials that connect to your Kubernetes service. And in the case of AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service, what you do is you just run this command for the Azure CLI, AZ AKS get credentials. You specify the resource group that you used for creating the AKS service and the name of the AKS service itself, which is called DevOps or Java Shops Test Feature Flags, and override any existing credentials that are there. And what this does is sets up some SSL for you so you can connect securely from your local machine. Then you just test that by saying kube control get nodes, and if everything's working well, meaning your kube control was installed and your AKS connection is good, then you should have a message like this that tells you your agent pool, all the nodes you have running. In this case, it's just running locally. Sorry, not locally. It's running on the server, but it's just running one node. Next thing we want to do. So Stephanie mentioned we have that local environment variable that we have to use. We don't put that in the Docker file for security reasons. We don't put that in GitHub for security reasons. So we still have to be able to work with it. And this is the cool thing. So you can create a secret file and you can have kube control apply file feature flag secret YAML. And what this will do is it'll take the local environment variable that Stephanie already set up for building locally. It will take that local environment variable and make it an environment variable in your Kubernetes setup. So let me show you that real quick. So that's the repo. This is the feature flag secret YAML file. So I'm still not giving anything away here. I can show anyone this, and this is on GitHub, but it keeps it secure because it works with the local environment variable down here. So I just say use the default namespace and any string data. So this is a connection string. The connection string's named app configuration connection string, and the value is passed from my environment variable. So once again, secure, nice feature there. All right, the next thing we need to do is we need to enable ingress control. So this was the hardest part, actually. This is what I spent the most time on, was creating this deployment file, the YAML file, to correctly deploy this and set up ingress control. So we're going to talk about that now. The first thing you want to do is, because we turned on that little toggle when we created the AKS service, we created an ingress control automatically. So Nginx is sitting there running on the server, but you have to be able to find it. So you use AKS show, and you put in the resource group and the name of the Kubernetes service. And then you do a query on add-on profiles, because it's technically an add-on for Kubernetes. And you check for the HTTP application routing zone name, and you return it in a table so you can copy it easily. And what this does is it returns the DNS zone that your Kubernetes is using for ingress. And that's this thing right here. So 68, blah, blah, blah. It's actually using that for ingress. And what you do is you create an app name, and you put the app name at the beginning of that with a dot, and then you've got a full URI that's going to find this application. Next thing we do is we apply a new file, which is a deployment file. The deployment file is called Spring Boot to Kubernetes YAML, and we use this DNS zone in that file. So let's go and have a look at that. And that's not so bad to put in there, because it's kind of public anyway. So if we look at that file, this is, like I say, this is the one that I spent the most work on to get working. So it's just using the standard Kubernetes apps v1. We create a deployment. We name the app Spring Boot to Kubernetes in different places here. And then, as I mentioned before, this is the URI that you need to create. Oh, no, sorry, this isn't the URI. This is your image for the Azure Container Registry. So where are you going to get this container from? It's from the Azure Container Registry called DevOps for JavaShop's test feature flags.azurecr.io. And the image is test feature flags, and the version is v1. And then we have a port of 80 that we're going to run this on. Next thing we do is we set up a cluster. The cluster itself is named, once again, the same as the app, Spring Boot to Kubernetes, cluster IP, port 80. And so that just helps with any scaling we're going to do. Third thing we do in this deployment file is we create a service, and this is the ingress service. And we use the add-on, which is HTTP application routing. And we have a host of, and I mentioned before, this is the app name, and this is the DNS zone that we pulled. Once you've done that, basically you can run this file using this command, kube control apply f Spring Boot to Kubernetes YAML, and then you can open the URL. And that's it. You get a white label error page. That's okay, because we have a default page of welcome. So that opens up the app itself, and everything's working. Now, part of the title, as I mentioned before, was GitHub Actions. So let's talk about GitHub Actions. From here, there's two different options for creating GitHub Actions. How much time do we have left? I'm on the clock here. Oh, there we go. Oh, we got time. Sweet. Okay, so we got a few more minutes. So what I'm going to do now, okay, that's great. So that shows you how to manually create a repo. How do you actually get an update to this, right? And the way you would handle an update is you want to use something like GitHub Actions. You can also use Azure DevOps. You could just manually update it. I wouldn't recommend that, but there's different ways to do it. Anyway, we're going to show GitHub Actions and how to do that. So we're going to go back to the portal. If I go into the actual repo here, this is the repo, and I go into my code, this is the workflow that's on it right now, deploy to AKS cluster YAML. And basically what it does is it deploys Spring Boot to AKS. It uses the app configuration connection string and it uses it as a GitHub secret this time. So GitHub secrets are up here in settings. If you go down to secrets, actions. So several things have been created here. There is a access token for connecting this GitHub repo to AKS. And there's also the app configuration connection string, and that's something I manually created. All the rest of these were updated automatically, and I'll show you how I actually did that now. Okay, so if we go into, there's two different ways to do it. You can go into GitHub Actions, and you can say, create a new workflow. And if you create a new workflow, we can go down here to deploy to AKS. There's a lot of configuration that needs to be done here. So the only disadvantage to using this one is it's a great start, but it doesn't automatically give you those tokens that I just showed you in the secrets, right? The tokens and the secrets are really handy to have, and then you have to manually create a service principal, and there's a lot of other work you need to do, and all the instructions are here. Let's skip over that one for now. I'm going to show you an easier way to do this, but it doesn't always work. That's the only caveat I can give you. Let's see here. Let's go into the dashboard in the portal, and we open up, oh, I was already in there, the Kubernetes service, and you scroll down to Deployment Center Preview. All right, and what we can do here, I've already created one of these, but I can actually add a new one and go to GitHub. Hopefully this is going to authenticate. I did it's going to ask me to authenticate. Ah, good. It's already, I already authenticated it earlier today, so usually it lasts a little while. So to ask me which repo, so basically we're in Azure, and it's asking me which repo do I want to use for Kubernetes connection, and I want to use this one. I want to make sure I get the right one. DevOps for JavaShop's test feature flags container. So go out to GitHub and get all of the code that's in my repo called DevOps for JavaShop's test feature flags container. Use the main branch. All right, so it's going to analyze this. It's going to find the Docker file. It's going to say, okay, we got the Docker file. Everything looks good. I can use this to build my action. The namespace, we're just going to use an existing one called default, and we're going to use an existing container registry as well, which is the one that I've already got. And basically what it does here is it actually automatically goes out, connects to that GitHub repo, creates a new GitHub action, which needs some edits, and also creates all of the access tokens that you need for the ACR, for the Azure Kubernetes service. So the registry and the service is all done. So which one did I just do? This one. Okay, so this one here. So basically from here, you can do a deployment, and it's going to deploy out to Spring Boot to Kubernetes, which is the default app that we've got there. So if we go back into our GitHub repo now, we're actually going to see two actions, and one's actually running right now. So it's adding the workflow file, but this is going to fail. And the reason it's going to fail, let's go into the second one here, GitHub workflows. Yeah, it's called deploy to AKS cluster. One of the reasons it's going to fail, there's a couple of different things, but because it doesn't have access to that environment variable. So it can't build, it can't complete the build just like we did on the local one until we actually add that. But I've got that problem solved because down here, I created a provided GitHub workflow, and you can literally just copy this. This is the reference to that app configuration connection string. You have to get it exactly right. So it's easier to copy it than try and code it. So you go back to your code, GitHub workflows, go into this one, add your, well, we can edit here. So we can edit this here. I think we still have a little extra time. Yeah, we have a couple minutes. I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get a little bit fancy. I am going to go in and I'll create a new code spaces. I could clone this and edit it. Code spaces allows you to create an environment. What it does is it grabs your code from your repo, puts it in a container on what's called a hosted runner on GitHub. creates an environment that you can use to edit this code, and then just gets you started with a sort of a clone of Visual Studio Code. It even works with extensions and things, so that's kind of cool. So where is my code? It's in GitHub. It's this one, and I can actually do it here. Now, I could have edited this directly in the repo. Of course, that's bad coding practice, bad DevOps, bad everything. So this is way better. I can save this, and then over here in my source control, it tells me I have one file that needs to be pushed. So once again, this is not in GitHub. This is in a container that connects as a clone to my GitHub repo. So update envar for run 2. And I can commit this.
Oh, stage it.
Yes. Oh yeah, I didn't stage. I never do. I'm so lazy because it gives you that message. You want me to stage it for you? And I was like, okay. I know it's judging me, but I don't care. There. So there we go. So I commit it. And so this is going to go in here now. And if we go into our GitHub workflows in our repo, so the name is there, and it also triggers an action. Now, there's a couple of other things that need to be updated here. You might have noticed that the deployment center is in preview, and there's a couple of things that won't work here. So I'll let it run for now, and we'll see how far it gets. But usually it crashes right about when it tries to build the repo itself and push it to a K8s. So anyway. Let me get back up to the top here. So that's 2 ways you can do GitHub repos. This one seems to be doing okay. Like I say, it's in oh yeah, there we go. As I mentioned, when it tries to push the repo, it doesn't get it because it can't, for some reason, it can't find the container. So you have to go in and you have to edit the reference to the nodes. Remember the nodes I showed you earlier are something different. Let me show you. I can show you this. Oh, we got more time than I thought we did. So that's cool. So if I go, oops, I'm off screen. If I go in here, whoops, didn't like that. It's not letting me resize it. Hold on.
Yeah, it's so zoomed in.
Yeah, it's weird. Okay. We've got multiple screens open, and it's showing across all 3 of my screens right now. This is fun. This is, thanks, Windows. Let's see if it allows me to do this. No. Okay. You know what? No, I can't open a new one because I haven't authenticated yet. Hey, let me try here. Where is it? Well, this is fun. I get to show you how to do Windows command line. Okay. Okay, so that's it. So then for some reason, it always gives you the wrong node. So you got to use this node. And I'm just going to edit this as long until we run out of time, but you get the idea. You can create this code, and then you can edit it here, and everything will be updated. And so, where is it? Okay, it's in the actual secrets. Anyway, so I won't edit this right now, but it's a brand new one, and there's some tweaking that you need to do. So there will be a little bit of a learning curve in terms of having actions and working with those. But that's basically how you create the repo, create the container, push it to ACR, get it over to Kubernetes, and then set up a GitHub action. You can either do it through the template through GitHub, or you can do it through here. And like I said, there's a little tweaking to be done. And no matter how well I get this one built, you're still going to have to learn those things when you actually tweak it and build it yourself for GitHub Actions. And that's it. I think we're ready for questions, no?
Yeah, it's about that time.
It's 2 o'clock. I think we have, let's see here. Yep. It says 5 minutes left in your presentation. So we're taking questions, folks. If you have any questions, let us know. We're opening the chat here, so we are checking things out. And thank you to all 33 of you who have attended. As I mentioned before, you can find this code at bbenz DevOps for Java Shops test feature flags containers. And the workflow that I just created that doesn't work is going to be there as well. So that's the one right there. The one that did work is here. So that's basically it.
Well, if no one has a question, I have an important question. How do I get swag from J4K?
Oh, yes. Okay. So
I think we have a slide for that.
yes, thank you. Yeah, I did promise that. We did promise that, didn't we?
We did. I mean, that's what I would be interested in, because I thought this demo was perfect, frankly. So there should be no questions.
No, that's not the case. So basically, this is the place. If you go to ACA-MS J4K22, you visit our virtual booth in the Whova app, or hit that QR code. You have to give us your name and your email, because we have to figure out how to send it to you. But there is a t-shirt and some stickers and some other things. That's an image of the t-shirt that we have. They're pretty cool. I'm actually gonna get a couple myself. Yeah, we've got enough for pretty much everyone at the conference. I think if it says win some swag, but
I think we all win it, actually. And we'll be
we
hanging out.
all win it. We all win it. Terms and conditions apply. I think there's certain places where we have trouble mailing things, so that might be a limitation. But don't worry about giving us your email. No salesman will call. This is going straight into only for this purpose, for collecting names, so we can send out. We won't be shared with anyone else at Microsoft or anything like that. It's only for mailing things to you. And that's it. Boy, anything else we should talk about while we're I don't know.
Turn on and off all the feature flags, show what the app can do.
Oh, yeah. So let's do that. So yeah, the feature flag itself. Yeah, I should mention that. So there's, the cool thing about A/B testing is you're sending a new feature to the app. Or sorry, the cool thing about feature flags is you're sending a new feature to the app without sending a new feature, without updating your code. So you turn on and off the actual app. If we turn it off here. And sometimes this takes a little longer to go away than it does to show up. Oh, that was quick. Okay. So the idea here is not only can you set up feature flags, you can also set up 50% feature flags. So I'm manually turning this thing on and off. But you can also create a new feature flag. Let's call it J4K demo. There's several things you can do with this. You can use a feature filter. So that could be targeting. So you target a default percentage of a certain group of people or certain users, so they can see this new feature and no one else. You can also set a time window. So you can set something for a week or a weekend or something like that, something that continues that. And the next thing you can do is you can do percentage. So you do custom. And it'd be great if they add this in, but I think it's Microsoft percentage. And then you could edit this, edit filter parameters, and you put a value in here of 50. And what this will do is means that everyone that comes to this website will, if it's enabled, will see 50% of the site. So only 50% of the people who go to this site will actually see the new feature. And that's what we call A/B testing. So you can just decide, maybe you're not sure if this feature is going to be a good one, or you just need to test it with a small group of users without bringing the site down and bringing it back up. You can do that by turning on this feature. You're going to have half the people seeing it, half not. And then you can increase that percentage until it gets to 100. That's called blue-green deployments. So the